that for me was the part where I was trawling through the 3+ hours of footage. That was the moment where I kind of sat up and thought, oh, I've not seen that before. I've not seen a governing body member get visibly emotional on stage to the point where he just kind of shuts down and needs to gather himself and needs to be kind of urged on by the audience. Hello there, I'm Lloyd Evans. Welcome to The Attic. In this video, I'll be sharing my thoughts on the 2024 annual meeting of the Watchtower Bible and Tract Society of Pennsylvania, which is the longest standing legal entity used by Jehovah's Witnesses. So the annual meetings are events at which the Jehovah's Witness leadership unveils new things, whether they be new understandings of Bible scripture or new light or new developments within the organization or anything new that the organization or its members can get excited about. So I try to do rebuttals to these events each year. This year I've managed to condense my thoughts down to a few highlights. So without further ado, let's roll the first clip.
What a beautiful group of Jehovah's precious servants. Maybe we'll coin a new expression today, gray beards of righteousness.
It was 140 years ago, in 1884, when Zion's Watchtower Tract Society was legally incorporated. Now, I know there are many gray beards here, but I understand that none of you were present on that occasion.
Psalm 133, verses 1 and 2 says, "Look, how good and how pleasant it is for brothers to dwell together in unity. It's like fine oil poured on the head that runs down the beard, Aaron's beard." Not only are we gathered at 23 Unity Place here in Newburgh, but many in the audience can now relate to what it's like to have oil run down the beard.
You brothers, imagine living 100 years with a beard, 100 years with just a mustache, 100 years with a goatee, 100 years clean shaven. Then go back and repeat that process with different variations.
And in other news, there's a new product in the Bethel Commissary, beard butter. Not to be confused with the butter that you spread on your toast.
So this was just a compilation I threw together of all the beard jokes at this year's annual meeting. And just for context, maybe you're watching this and you don't know much about Jehovah's Witnesses. It's only as recently as December last year, or December 2023, that Jehovah's Witnesses finally relented on their ridiculous rule that men aren't allowed to grow beards, or men who grow beards are to be limited in how they can be used in the organization, in what roles or privileges they can aspire to. It took all the way up until December of 2023 for them to figure out that this was a completely unbiblical rule that they'd been clinging to for decades. They threw out a governing body update hosted by Stephen Lett, dispensing with the rule and not really offering any satisfying explanation as to how the organization could have gotten it so wrong over such a long period of time. And now it seems even members of the governing body have wasted no time whatsoever in growing beards. And I don't know, for me, it was just a little bit tone deaf. I mean, you would maybe expect one or two beard jokes, but it just felt a bit wrong for them to be quite so flippant on this subject. Bear in mind, this was a rule that governed the way men were allowed to groom themselves for decades, and where there were, quite serious penalties for men who dared to grow a beard. And then suddenly the rule is out of the window and it's now a subject for comedy.
It is a pleasure to announce that 2 additional brothers have been appointed to serve as members of the governing body. Well, brothers Jody Jedele and Jacob Rumpf. Both brothers are anointed Christians who have a long history of loyal service to Jehovah. Brother Jedele began his full-time service in 1989 and Bethel service in 1990. Brother Rumpf began his full-time service in 1995 and Bethel service in 2020. Both brothers served as helpers to the service committee of the governing body for a while. We thank our Heavenly Father Jehovah for raising up such faithful men to share in the work of the governing body. We pray that Jehovah will richly bless brothers Jedele and Rumpf and their wives.
Well, young brothers and sisters, we want you to be able to get involved in this exciting work as early as possible. And so, I have an exciting announcement to read. It reads this way. We are pleased to inform you that the governing body has decided to reduce the minimum age requirement to enter Bethel service or to assist with theocratic construction projects from 19 to 18 years of age.
We need young people who want to go and make disciples of people of all the nations. Well, how old do you need to be to apply for the School for Kingdom Evangelizers? Well, we're very pleased to announce today that the governing body has decided that young brothers and sisters 21 years of age or older may now apply to attend SKE. Isn't that exciting and wonderful?
So this is a compilation I've thrown together of all the key announcements from the 2024 annual meeting. Basically, we had there the 2 new governing body members announced, Jody Jedele and Jacob Rumpf. We had it announced that young Jehovah's Witness men and women can now apply for Bethel service and construction projects from the age of 18. And we heard that Jehovah's Witnesses can now apply for SKE, the School for Kingdom Evangelizers, from the age of 21. SKE is the modern equivalent of what I went through when I was around 25. Back then it was called the Ministerial Training School. It's been through various iterations since then, and now it is SKE. Back when I attended, there was a higher age limit. I think it was something like 23 or 24 years old. I went when I was 25. So they've brought the age down. Really nothing too exciting, I think, about those announcements. If anything, in my opinion, it kind of smacks of desperation that they clearly need more people who are actually actively involved in the organization. And in order to do that, they are making it easier for younger people to get involved. If they can bring down the age limits, then they'll have more people at their disposal to serve the organization in various ways. I did actually do a video on the announcement of the governing body members, Jody Jedele and Jacob Rumpf. Incidentally, both of those 2 men give the opening and closing prayers respectively at this annual meeting, so they make an appearance on stage. just not quite interesting enough for me to include it in the clips, unfortunately. But one thing that I didn't include in my video announcing the 2 new governing body members, because I wasn't aware of it at the time that I made the video, was the following video that you can actually find on YouTube of Jody Jedely talking about his experience in the real estate business.
The CCIM PIN or designation is recognized in the real estate industry, both locally in the United States as well as internationally, as being a premier real estate designation. The CCIM stands for Certified Commercial Investment Member. And in order to obtain this designation, one has to complete both a rigorous educational component as well as real-life experience, a portfolio of qualifying experience. The educational component revolves around 4 core classes, in addition to other classes. Those 4 classes are case study-driven courses. They revolve around financial analysis, market analysis, user analysis, and then investor analysis. Other classes include ethics, advanced negotiations, and other classes specific to the need that we may have at the time. The portfolio of qualifying transactions, or the real-world experience, requires that we have both a volume requirement, or we've done a number of transactions, as well as what type of transactions are allowed. This ensures that the CCIM has a business understanding that they can use to help their clients. All of this put together allows one to become a CCIM and a member of the CCIM Institute.
So that was Jody Jedely, now governing body member Jody Jedely, espousing the merits of becoming a CCIM in the world of real estate. So this particular video, I will put a link to the original video in the description below, although goodness knows how long this video is actually going to stay online, because I actually consider it quite damning for reasons I'm going to go into. But it's on a channel with just a tiny channel. The title of the video is Touchstone International Properties, What is CCIM? The description reads, what is CCIM and why do clients prefer to work with a CCIM? Jody Jedely is a CCIM and managing partner at Touchstone International Properties, gives us an explanation. So here is a man who not only has an extensive background in real estate, but has also made a video at some point in the past, albeit, talking about the merits of attaining this designation of CCIM. The video on YouTube dates back to 2012. It's possible that the video goes even earlier or was made even earlier than 2012. But it's worth remembering that according to Gerrit Loesch's announcement, Jody Jedely began full-time service in Bethel in 1990. Now, I would suggest that this particular video was made after 1990. It could well have been made back in 2012, which is when the video was uploaded to this particular channel. But almost certainly, in my opinion, I mean, I can't be 100% sure about it, but almost certainly he's making this video as a Bethelite, which is very, very interesting because Bethelites actually take a vow of poverty. They're not allowed to be involved in any kind of commercial activities or money-making enterprises outside of their work in Bethel, because they're part of this order of full-time servants, and outside work is strictly prohibited unless they get a special exemption. Now, I actually did a little bit of digging on ChatGPT to find out what the requirements are for becoming a CCIM. It says earning the CCIM designation typically takes 1 to 3 years, depending on how quickly candidates complete the coursework, build their portfolio, and pass the exam. The entire process is demanding, with an emphasis on mastering complex financial and investment analysis skills. And then under costs, it says the total cost for a CCIM designation can vary wildly, ranging from around $5,000 to $10,000, depending on membership fees, course fees, and exam fees. So isn't that interesting? We have now a governing body member who has essentially been through a form of higher education requiring him to dedicate 1 to 3 years to achieving this designation of CCIM, and at no small expense, because it says there between $5,000 to $10,000 has been invested, just so he can sell real estate. And this is a man, Jody Jedely, who is now required as a governing body member to tell millions of young Jehovah's Witnesses that it would be wrong for them to pursue higher education.
And now a word to the parents. We know that you parents, you love your children and you want the very best future possible for your young ones. And so we encourage you, set goals of full-time service in front of your children and help them to achieve these goals. And will you miss them if they should be called to Bethel or they go off on a Kingdom Hall assignment somewhere? Of course you will. But don't hold them back and insist that they stay home with you for fear of missing them. You may be depriving them of the most fulfilling life. But rather, can you be like Hannah? Turn with me, please, to 1 Samuel chapter 1. 1 Samuel 1:28. Jehovah blessed Hannah with a son. And what did she say? What did she do? In 1 Samuel 1:28, she says, I in turn now lend him to Jehovah. For all his days he is lent to Jehovah. Can you lend your son or daughter to Jehovah?
So we've just been watching fairly recently appointed governing body member Jeffrey Winder speaking at this year's annual meeting, asking Jehovah's Witness parents to lend their children to Jehovah. So this was the same talk in which he announced that the lower age limit would be reduced to 18 for entry into Bethel. And as part of that announcement, he's essentially telling Jehovah's Witness parents, don't you be selfish. Of course, you're going to miss your 18-year-old, 19-year-old, 20-year-old son or daughter if they enter full-time service at Bethel. But think of it this way, you're lending your child to Jehovah. And I don't know, there just seemed to be something very sinister about that. You know, this is an age when really young people should be making the most of their youth, should be exploring opportunities, should be bettering themselves through learning, through higher education. And instead, Jeffrey Winder wants them wandering around corridors at Bethel's, clutching papers or sat behind computers, doing the bidding of the governing body, making sure the organization is somehow benefited. It is not about lending people or children or 18, 19, 20-year-olds to Jehovah. It is about giving over your children to the Jehovah's Witness organization.
When I was just 19 years old, a brother invited me to attend my very first annual meeting. It was a special one, the 100th anniversary of the Watchtower Bible and Tract Society, held in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. I was so excited, I thought I died and went to heaven. I couldn't believe that brother would invite me to attend when I was so young. But the encouragement from that experience has stayed with me right up until this very moment.
So this was a clip from Mark Sanderson's talk. You'll remember earlier on we saw Mark Sanderson announcing that the lower age limit for attending SKE has been reduced to 21. And it's during this talk that he regales us with this story of how he attended his very first annual meeting at the age of 19. And he makes this quip about feeling so excited it was like he died and gone to heaven. I'm sure he didn't really feel that way. I mean, that would be a silly way to feel. I mean, I can understand him feeling excited, but in any case, he's clearly exaggerating, and he's not just exaggerating, he's joking. And if you're watching this as someone who knows nothing about Jehovah's Witnesses, you're probably thinking, I don't really see the joke. And to be honest, even if you have been one of Jehovah's Witnesses, you're probably still going to struggle to see the joke because it's not a very good joke. But he's essentially joking here about being anointed. He's talking about the fact that at the age of 19, he had the heavenly hope. He had decided he was one of the anointed at the tender age of 19, meaning that at the annual Jehovah's Witness memorials, he was partaking of the emblems, the bread and the wine. He was letting his entire congregation know that he was special. He had been chosen to be in this elite group of 144,000 anointed Christians who will one day rule as kings and priests over planet Earth. This is what Mark Sanderson believes. This is what's going on in his mind, or was going on in his mind, apparently as young as 19. But rather than this just being something that he's content to keep to himself and not make a big deal about, he's mentioning it at this annual meeting. And not only is he mentioning it, he's also sort of joking about it. I mean, is this really something that should be a source of levity? Isn't this something that, again, is quite personal and serious? And actually, when you look back, Mark Sanderson has form for this sort of thing, because what he's essentially doing is bragging. He's bragging in front of the annual meeting audience that he is one of the anointed. And he has form for bragging on camera.
An 18-year-old brother was trying to decide what he wanted to do after high school. He was raised in the truth, and in his heart, he wanted to be a pioneer. But he also had a scholarship to go to university and some other grants, and he had been accepted to attend. He had many questions. How was he going to support himself? And much pressure from his teachers and counselors to go to university. Well, that was me some years ago. I'm so glad that with the help of Jehovah and my parents and other mature friends in the congregation, I made the decision, just like so many other brothers and sisters around the world, to turn down that scholarship, to give up university, and go directly into the full-time service.
I think what we're seeing here, quite frankly, is just ego, the ego of Mark Sanderson on full display, both in bragging about being of the anointed, and here in this clip from the 2020 convention, he's bragging about having a scholarship and having grants and having all of these amazing opportunities for higher education when he was 18, that he turned his back on. He piously turned his back on in order to pursue full-time service. And interestingly, another element of the annual meeting is you have these music video montages while the audience, I think before the meeting starts, and there are one or two clips during this music video interlude that show Mark Sanderson in really quite an elevated politician-like mode, where he's going out to places where there are evidently disasters or disaster responses underway. He's waving to his adoring followers. He's meeting people undergoing medical treatment. He's hugging people. he's delivering motivational speeches. This was all stuff that apparently we needed to see in the music video interlude to the annual meeting. And it really just emphasizes what I've been saying for quite some time, that Mark Sanderson is really quite a unique specimen on the governing body. I believe he has an inordinate amount of power among the governing body when it comes to decision making. And there are reasons why I say that, other than mere speculation. A lot of it is based on an actual interview I had with someone who came out of Bethel and was discussing how Mark Sanderson does seem to have quite a lot of power. I'm going to drop a thumbnail to the particular video in which I discuss Mark Sanderson's role on the governing body, so that you can go down this particular rabbit hole if you wish. But suffice to say, plenty of evidence on display here of just how astronomical Mark Sanderson's ego really is.
Now, for many years, what did we think? We thought, well, that number will go down and down and down and down. Now, I don't know about you, but me, when that report came out, just how many partakers? And what were we thinking? Well, probably, maybe we didn't say it, but we were thinking, the number will go down, 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 and there'll be just a couple of old guys in a wheelchair who will get their reward. Well, I'm exaggerating, but that was sort of the feeling, wasn't it? But now, what have we seen in recent years? Those numbers have gone up and up. And not only that, younger brothers have been appointed on the governing body. Now, I know what you're all thinking. 2 new ones, how old are they? We know. You're not Googling now, but you will be. But you see, we need to be careful about what we're thinking with regard to the number of anointed ones left on earth. You see, 19 years ago, I was appointed on the governing body. Even I thought I was too young. Now they tell me I'm not so young anymore. But do we see the point? What does the Bible actually tell us with regard to this? Well, it doesn't say the number would just dwindle down to just having a few older ones left. No. The great crowd of other sheep will be judged on the basis of how they deal with Christ's brothers. So that means the faithful and discreet slave, as well as all the anointed throughout the earth, will continue to be active in doing the work and wanting and needing your support, right up until the time that suddenly they will be reassigned. And isn't that what Matthew 24, verse 31 says? There'll be a gathering, the final gathering of the anointed from all different parts of the earth. So for us to think, well, there's some new ones on the governing body, they don't look too old. Maybe we've got a little bit extra time. No. Jehovah is making sure that the faithful and discreet slave is continuing to work and is effective right up until that time of reassignment.
So we've just seen Jeffrey Jackson giving his talk at the 2024 annual meeting, and I've selected this clip because it's actually quite confusing. It's confusing because I think Jeffrey Jackson is here conflating the anointed with the faithful and discreet slave, which is quite a faux pas. I mean, are we supposed to be taking the faithful and discreet slave teaching as introduced in 2012 seriously or not? In 2012, the organization changed the official teaching that the memorial partakers, or those who partake of the emblems, the bread and the wine at the memorial every year, the anointed, they are the faithful and discreet slave. That was the previous understanding. They are this elite group who would rule in heaven as kings and priests. And then in 2012, they had a change of heart, they had new light, and they decided to basically disenfranchise these thousands of people around the world who consider themselves to be future kings and priests with Christ in heaven. And they said, okay, you are of the anointed, but you are not of the faithful and discreet slave. They're two different things now. So the anointed are just people who have a heavenly hope, Jehovah's Witnesses who believe they're going to heaven. And the faithful and discreet slave are exclusively the governing body. But when Jeffrey Jackson is talking, first of all, it's quite distracting how much he shouts throughout this talk. It's kind of annoying, and you're going to see more of that in the clips to follow. So that's irritating, but it's also noticeable that he speaks about the anointed and the faithful and discreet slave interchangeably, almost as though the 2012 new light never happened. Now, is this a change? Is this a new understanding? Have they ditched the new light from 2012? No, I don't think they have. I think Jeffrey Jackson's just being a bit lazy here, and he's wanting to explain away the fact that this number of the anointed has been increasing and increasing and increasing each year. And he's basically telling his audience that's really no big deal. It doesn't matter how many anointed there are, doesn't matter how many people are partaking of the memorial emblems. When the end comes, and all of these anointed ones, together with the faithful and discreet slave governing body, who are all supposed to be made up of anointed Jehovah's Witnesses, they're all just going to vanish, which is essentially the rapture. They don't like to use the word rapture, but that's what he's talking about. I also found it funny when he was joking. There was a lot of joking going on here. Did you notice? I find that Jeffrey Jackson, when he's giving these talks about Bible prophecy and new light, he almost seems to treat the whole thing like it's a stand-up routine. And I find that quite irritating, to be honest, because this is all supposed to be life or death. This is all about understanding the Bible and making it through Armageddon and taking seriously the teachings of the faithful slave. And so for him to just be kind of making these jokes and deliberately eliciting laughter from the audience, it kind of makes me wonder how seriously he's taking it. But I found it especially interesting when he mentioned the two new governing body members, Jody Jedely and Jacob Rumpf, and he talked about Googling them.
We know you're not Googling now, but you will be.
Is that really something he wants to be saying from the platform of the annual meeting? Does he really want to be encouraging Jehovah's Witnesses to Google these men, not just go on jw.org and check out their credentials, but specifically go on Google? If they were to go on Google, specifically to find out more about Jody Jedely, they would find out what I was discussing earlier, namely the fact that Jody Jedely is a real estate guy and has devoted quite some time and money to attaining a secular qualification in the world of real estate, which is an uncomfortable fact, or would be an uncomfortable fact for many Jehovah's Witnesses to come to terms with. So this was certainly a very confusing and frankly awkward part of Jeffrey Jackson's talk at this year's annual meeting.
The second subject we'd like to talk about is our view with regard to the start of the Great Tribulation, with the destruction of Babylon the Great. When we look through the scriptures, in Revelation chapter 16, what does it tell us? That the waters would gradually dry up. Yes, churches are losing support in some countries. For example, Europe. It wasn't that long ago that most nations in Europe were very religious. But now people are turning their backs on religion. But at the same time, when we look at Africa and South America, we see that religion still has a strong influence. So now, what could be that little voice in our mind saying, well, yeah, we see it's going in the right direction, but maybe not just yet. We've got a little bit more time left. But again, we need to remember what the scriptures tell us. And if you'd turn with me this time, please, to Revelation chapter 17. This is one of the chapters that describes the destruction of false religion, or in other words, when the Great Tribulation starts. So let's read Revelation 17 and verse 17, and note, please, what it tells us. For God put it into their hearts to carry out his thought, yes, to carry out their one thought by giving their kingdom to the wild beast until the words of God will have been accomplished. Now, what is this one thought? Well, up to now, we've said the one thought is their desire to turn on false religion. And we can understand that because the context is talking about the destruction of false religion. But you see, if you look back at that verse, what is the one thought? Now, this means we have to adjust our understanding, another change. What does it say? The one thought refers to the nations being willing to hand over power, their political power, to the scarlet-colored wild beast, the United Nations.
Isn't it amazing how easy it is for the governing body to arrive at new light nowadays? All they need to do is read the Bible in context, and suddenly they can unlock this treasure trove of new understandings, of adjustments in their understandings regarding Bible prophecy. Seriously, how are we supposed to respect this? How are we supposed to look at the governing body and see God's channel of communication? It's not a very efficient channel, is it? So it's taken all the way up to 2024 for them to come to a new understanding as to the one thought. It's no longer about the nations turning on Babylon the Great or false religion, or essentially any religion that isn't Jehovah's Witnesses. It's now supposedly to do with the nations giving their power to, as we're going to see, the United Nations. So that's the change. That's the big deal. Jeffrey Jackson seems to be the governing body member who gets to do these big reveals, especially when it comes to Armageddon and the Great Tribulation. And this is his massive revelation for us in the 2024 annual meeting.
The 10 horns that you saw mean 10 kings who have not yet received the kingdom. But they do receive authority as kings for 1 hour with the wild beast. These have one thought, so they give their power and authority to the wild beast. So up to now, we've assumed these 10 kings, which represent all the political powers and governments in the world at the moment, that they did this during the last days by supporting, first of all, the League of Nations and then the United Nations. But now, what do we understand this to be, seeing we understand verse 17? Well, there will come a time when all political powers on earth, which includes many who have never been part of the 7 world powers, they will see that they need to collectively pool their power by giving it to the United Nations to try and solve some of the problems in the world. And they will rule, notice, what does it say, for 1 hour, just a short period of time. So this newly empowered United Nations, from that time on, will rule collectively for a short time, but it will enable them to destroy false religion and fight against Jesus and Jehovah's people. Now, isn't that exciting?
Yeah, it's absolutely thrilling. So apologies if you do actually find this intensely boring, but I have to cover this because this is new light. This is a new understanding that they've come up with. They've now decided that when the 10 kings give over their power, they're not doing it in the past, as was the previous understanding to the League of Nations. This is all something that's going to happen in the future. It's not just about the establishment of the League of Nations and the United Nations. It's a specific giving away or ceding of sovereignty to the United Nations so that the United Nations has the clout it needs to destroy false religion and then turn on Jehovah's Witnesses, which is what Jehovah's Witnesses believe is going to happen just before Armageddon. So it's not like a groundbreaking change. It's by no stretch one of the most remarkable bits of new light that has flashed forth from the wisdom of the governing body, but it is nonetheless worth registering and hopefully explaining for you. And ultimately, all of this is designed to increase the anticipation of Jehovah's Witnesses regarding Armageddon, to keep them on tenterhooks and in this constant state of readiness. And we're going to see that especially in Jeffrey Jackson's concluding remarks.
So what have we learned in our discussion? Well, yes, some things change gradually. But brothers and sisters, remember, there are some sudden things that are about to occur. Let's remember the two things as a reminder. First of all, the remaining anointed ones will suddenly be taken to heaven while they are still very active. The second one, Jehovah will suddenly move the nations to give their political power to the United Nations. So what's the takeaway? Don't be complacent. Don't think, oh, this is going to gradually change. No, some things won't gradually change. They will occur suddenly as acts of God. So be ready and don't be surprised by sudden change.
Jeffrey Jackson needs to be careful. I'm just going to say it. He really needs to calm down. It's not good for his health, a man of his proportions, if I can put it diplomatically, to be getting that agitated. And it is, just to be candid for a moment, quite noticeable just how much Jeffrey Jackson is yelling at his audience throughout this talk, but especially there at the end. He starts off his talk with almost a stand-up routine, talking about essentially how silly the expectations of Jehovah's Witnesses were regarding the anointed, and those were expectations that were specifically based on teachings that were given to them by the governing body at that time, due to the generation teaching, due to the belief that the generation that witnessed the events of 1914, the generation of anointed Christians, would not pass away before Armageddon. So making light of it and joking about it is itself, I would say, quite tone deaf and quite inappropriate. But he's gone from stand-up mode to just barking and yelling mode. And again, all of this seems to be intended to keep Jehovah's Witnesses in this perpetual state of readiness and tension and urgency. What he's saying effectively is, no matter what our teachings may have been in the past that might be still leading you to the assumption that the end is quite far off, we now have an explanation that makes all of these things current. We're just making a few tweaks here and there so that the book of Revelation is talking about now rather than the events of the 20th century, which is essentially what the Revelation climax, the now obsolete Revelation climax book, was all about. This new light is entirely focused on ramping up the doomsday rhetoric and keeping Jehovah's Witnesses in a constant state of readiness for the end.
Since our last annual meeting, Jehovah has directed his people in many different ways, reflecting his love and wisdom. Of course, the most significant occurrence is that we've welcomed back thousands who had been removed from the congregation. And certainly there has been great joy in heaven, but here on earth as well. We're delighted to have these dear ones back with us once again. Wouldn't you agree? The next part of our program relates to the remarkable response we've seen to Jehovah's mercy expressed to those who had been removed from the congregation. It's a video entitled Blessings of Jehovah's Mercy. Please enjoy.
It's heartwarming to hear reports of how Jehovah has blessed congregation elders as they search for those who have been removed from the congregation. For example, in the first 4 months after the 2024 Governing Body Update Number 2, in the South Africa and Philippines branch territories combined, more than 1,200 have come back to the congregation. Here in the United States branch territory, over 5,000 brothers and sisters have been welcomed back. In the Brazil branch territory, some 5,200 publishers have been reinstated. And in the Central America branch territory, over 5,300 individuals have come back to the congregation. The numbers are exciting, but we can't overlook that each of these dear ones have returned to Jehovah, and Jehovah loves them.
So that was Gary Bro speaking in a special video being shown at this year's 2024 annual meeting on the subject of shunning, or the new approach that's being taken for Jehovah's Witnesses who were removed from the congregation. A special effort is now being made to reach out to those ones who were removed and encourage them to return. And I personally find it interesting that when they're talking about numbers, they're talking about like the first few months after the changes were announced, which is when you would think there would be the largest influx of Jehovah's Witnesses or ex-Jehovah's Witnesses who wanted to come back, then suddenly having an opportunity. And don't get me wrong, you know, these are some big numbers, but we're still only talking, you know, a few thousand here or there. Bear in mind, this is an organization of nearly 9 million. So a few thousand here or there is similar to what you would be expecting anyway in terms of baptisms, isn't it really? It's not it's not like a seismic shift in the number of Jehovah's Witnesses. So I can't help but wonder whether the organization might be feeling a little bit disappointed that there weren't more people who wanted to return to the fold.
One person had been removed from the congregation some 17 years ago, and on his own, he was watching JW Broadcasting. He saw the update. He said, "This is it's time to come home." Mm-hmm. And so he called the Kingdom Hall. He left a voicemail, and the brothers received his message. They reached right out to him. A Bible study was started, and very happily, he too has progressed to being reinstated, and his parents were able to fly in and be there at the Kingdom Hall that night. He was reinstated. He later said, "This is truly a homecoming."
I feel like it helps us to see another side of Jehovah as our Father, and you see how much he loves his children. And then he allows us to have a part in helping them to come back to him. And so we get to reflect his mercy too. It's such a privilege.
It's really noteworthy how emotional some of these testimonials are. The people telling these stories are getting choked up when they're describing removed Jehovah's Witnesses or disfellowshipped Jehovah's Witnesses returning. Even in cases where it doesn't seem they're talking about their own family members, they're still getting choked up on camera. I feel there's some interesting psychology going on here. It's almost as though on some perhaps subconscious level, Jehovah's Witnesses recognize how cruel shunning is. So they will leap on any example of shunning ceasing, of shunning ending, as a reason for joy and elation and getting all teary-eyed. And I thought that story of the man who was reinstated and his family flying in to be at the meeting where he was reinstated, doesn't that just show the impact that shunning is having? You know, these are parents who previously will have been having nothing whatsoever to do with their son, who will have spent years treating their son as though he is dead. And all of a sudden, because of a technicality, because of some new light that means that it's easier for him to get reinstated, all of a sudden he gets to get the thumbs up from the organization and from his local elders, and then they can book a flight, and then they can come and sit next to their son and treat him like a normal human being. It is so profoundly messed up.
Back in 1979, my father was removed from the congregation, and I was 8. You can grow up thinking, okay, maybe, my dad will come back in a decade goes by, 2 decades goes by, 3 decades goes by, and you don't want to lose hope, but it does tend to make you think that maybe this person might not ever come back. I get a phone call, and it's a friend of mine I've known for many years. He and another brother went to go see my dad, and he even accepted a study. At this point, I said, wow. I said, that's great, because most of my childhood and my entire adult life, I have not known a father who was serving Jehovah. You should never, ever underestimate the lengths Jehovah will go to save one sheep. One sheep. So, yeah, it's... Yeah, it's, If you weren't a believer in Jehovah's mercy before, no one will ever be able to say, when everything is over in the system of things, that Jehovah didn't care enough, he didn't make the efforts, he didn't send anybody out. Yeah, you really can't say that, because Jehovah's making sure that the extra effort was made.
Very touching indeed. But it wasn't just a one-time invitation. In imitation of our Father Jehovah, the elders continue to try to render assistance to those who have been removed from the congregation. They continue to reach out to them.
Wasn't that an extraordinary moment at the annual meeting? That, for me, was the part where I was trawling through the 3+ hours of footage. That was the moment where I kind of sat up and thought, oh, I've not seen that before. I've not seen a governing body member get visibly emotional on stage to the point where he just kind of shuts down and needs to gather himself and needs to be kind of urged on by the audience. So I would love to know the backstory there. I would love to know whether maybe that last story that was related about the father who got reinstated, I'd love to know whether that touched a nerve with Gage Fleegle, or whether Gage Fleegle has perhaps another family member or someone else who's close to him that he is being forced to shun. And just hearing those stories made it difficult for him to just go straight into hosting mode as soon as the video montage was over. So fascinating moment. And doesn't it show that the governing body members, they're not necessarily just robots. You know, they do some evil things. They allow abuse, child abuse, to be covered up on an industrial scale, and they are aware of how much abuse there is, and they are keeping it covered up, Gage Fleegle included. They are overseeing the needless deaths of Jehovah's Witnesses who are refusing blood transfusions that could save their lives. So, you know, this does not by any means give Gage Fleegle a free pass. But as I've repeatedly argued on this channel, the situation is nuanced. It's not a case of black or white, cynical or completely deluded. There are shades in between, and I feel as though what we've seen there is a very rare glimpse into the humanity, dare I say it, of a governing body member. Will we ever know the full backstory there? Will we ever know what it was that caused Gage Fleegle to just pause for a moment? Unlikely. But nonetheless, there it is on camera, and it really wouldn't surprise me if they edit the final annual meeting that goes out on JW Broadcasting so that that isn't shown, because I think it would be awkward if they were to include that, and they have been known to edit annual meetings to get rid of awkward parts before. Maybe I could be wrong. We'll see. I'll happily eat my words if they keep that in. But yeah, just the story as well of the guy who talks about his father being reinstated after decades. And he's saying things like, how can anyone say that Jehovah isn't merciful, you know? Jehovah put forth all of this effort just for one sheep, and no one can say that Jehovah doesn't try. And I'm sorry, mate, I can't be on board with you there, because you should never have been severed from your father, or you should never have had your relationship with your father interfered with in that way. I'm sure there wasn't full shunning for the full period that he was disfellowshipped or removed, because he describes his father getting removed at the age of 8. So probably his father was still able to speak to him for a few years, but certainly once he was old enough to leave home, he would have been expected to treat his father like he was dead. And that's disgusting. There's no excuse for that sort of behavior. And I'm not surprised that he's getting all emotional now, that he's able to that he's being given permission by the organization to have a relationship with his father again. But does this make the Jehovah's Witness religion a shining beacon of God's mercy? Absolutely not.
Hey, soon we're having a memorial, and you have to come. It's the most important event. This invite is for you and your mom. I can tell you more about it at our study. Okay, thanks. Bye. See you later, Sophia.
That's right, Camille. Okay, let's move on to the next paragraph. Do you mind reading?
Okay, sure. Many people hope for good things to happen, but they cannot be sure that their hope...
Okay. Now it's your turn. Life was perfect. Adam and Eve disobeyed Jehovah. They lost their perfect life and died. Right. After that, nobody was perfect. So everyone would grow old and die. Jesus came to earth and taught everyone about Jehovah. He gave his life. He died for us. That's right. So that in the future, nobody will have to die.
So we've just been watching a clip from the latest Caleb and Sophia Become Jehovah's Friend epic episode. The title of this particular Become Jehovah's Friend is The Greatest Act of Love, and as you can see there, it's all focused on the memorial. So they've made essentially a Pixar-style cartoon emphasizing to kids the importance of the memorial being the annual event at which Jehovah's Witnesses collectively disrespect the Lord's evening meal. I mean, there's no other way to describe it. It literally says in the Bible that Christians are to drink of the wine and eat of the bread. And instead, Jehovah's Witnesses say, well, this has got to be just for those who are anointed, those who are going to rule in heaven. So what we'll do is we'll make sure everybody doesn't eat of the bread and drink of the wine, and we'll just have it passed around so that everyone just kind of looks at it and then passes it. And that's what happens at a Jehovah's Witness memorial, but they regard it as kind of the most sacred event of the year. And here, young Jehovah's Witnesses are being trained on how to invite their classmates to this event.
When we go to the memorial, it's a way to say thank you. I hope my mom wants to come too. Mom!
Hi, baby.
Should we get ready for the memorial?
Oh, honey. It was a long day. I'm so sorry. I don't think we can make it. Can't wait to see you tonight. Let us know if you need a ride. It's Sophia's mom.
Mom, we can do this.
Let's do it.
Yay! Mommy?
Yes, my little princess?
I'm glad you're studying the Bible.
Me too.
At this time, we will have the passing of the wine. As we all go home tonight, think about what Jesus' sacrifice means to you.
Or before we do that, let's just talk a little bit about what we've just seen. So we're about to see a depiction of paradise. That's where all of this is going. Sophia's friend is about to see what she can look forward to in welcoming back her grandmother, who we see earlier in the cartoon, passes away. And so it's really kind of messed up. It uses kind of emotional manipulation to use the death of dead loved ones as leverage on children to make them more invested in the Jehovah's Witness message. But yeah, it's interesting how Sophia manages to not just pitch and sell the memorial to her friend, but then her friend picks up the baton and is also able to convince her mother. And I found it a little bit jarring when her mother says, "Yes, my little princess," because the truth of the matter, of course, is if these two end up becoming Jehovah's Witnesses, currently the mother is studying, that's what we see in the cartoon. If these two end up becoming Jehovah's Witnesses and this little girl ends up getting removed from the congregation, which can still happen even with all of the latest measures, then she'll very quickly no longer be Mummy's little princess. She'll be Mummy's little princess who Mummy cannot talk to and must treat as though she's dead. That's the reality of the organization that is being promoted in this cartoon.
Think about what Jesus' sacrifice means to you.
Come with me.
Zoe. Turn around.
Zoe!
Grandma? It's you!
My baby girl.
I missed you.
Grandma's here now.
Jehovah has shown love in many ways. But when he gave Jesus life for us, that was the greatest act of love.
So yes, that's the latest Become Jehovah's Friend epic cartoon, The Greatest Act of Love. Zoe gets reunited with her dead grandmother in paradise because she goes to the memorial and apparently ends up becoming one of Jehovah's Witnesses. So make of that what you will. I've made a video before, by the way, on the problems with the paradise teaching, and I always cringe whenever they depict paradise, which they frequently do, be it in music videos or illustrations. And now in this cartoon, we get a cartoon version of what paradise looks like. And it just seems to just be this weird place where people are just randomly wandering around gardens talking to each other, which, I mean, fair enough, if that's your idea of paradise, I guess. The questions I would have would be, why are the Bible characters, which I'm guessing are the people dressed in ancient garb, why do they have to wear ancient garb? Why aren't they allowed to wear the same clothes as everybody else? Do they have to wear ancient clothing to identify that they are people from ancient times? That doesn't really make much sense to me. And also, how does everybody have so much time on their hands if we're seeing there some quite sophisticated engineering? I mean, they've created what looks like a man-made island in front of a waterfall with bridges and with decking and with some quite ornate woodwork and or metalwork. So, as I've repeatedly argued, where are all the lumber mills, and where are all the metal foundries and mines and quarries and people toiling away to create this utopia? You never see that, do you? You just see people kind of wandering around, almost bored, to be honest, just like, oh, let's mingle, let's just talk to each other. There's nothing interesting to me about that version of paradise. And I think that when you actually devote any amount of thought to paradise, as I've argued before, the whole thing just comes crumbling down. The teaching itself is not rooted in Scripture. The word paradise only appears 4 or 5 times in the entire Bible and is almost never referring to an actual earthly paradise. So if this is actually God's will for mankind, he's communicating it extremely poorly or in an extremely elusive way. When you actually study the Scriptures, it's clear that God's intention, or the overall game plan, is that when people die, they go to heaven. That there isn't really, unless you invoke restorationist texts referring to the prosperity of God's people if they obey him, which talks about, paradise in the here and now because God's people are being blessed by God. Unless you invoke those verses, there really is nothing in the Bible that gets you to the Jehovah's Witness version of paradise. And yet this is what is keeping nearly 9 million Jehovah's Witnesses under the spell of the organization. And what's most chilling, what's most inappropriate about this whole thing is that they're using the memories of our dead loved ones, in this case, Zoe's memory of her grandmother. They're using death and grief and bereavement as emotional leverage to get people into the organization and keep them trapped there.
Additionally, think about this. There is nothing, absolutely nothing boring about Jehovah or any of his creation. I personally can't think of any two things that are exactly identical. Even so-called identical twins you're looking at here. Notice their teeth are different. Their freckle pattern is different. Their fingerprints are different. Their personalities are different. They are certainly not identical. In fact, there are no two dogs, no two trees, no two tigers, no two things I can think of that are exactly alike. Think about zebras for a moment. Now you look at this herd of zebras, it looks like they're basically all striped the same. No two zebras on the planet striped exactly the same. And scientists even think that this is how a baby zebra recognizes and finds his mother in a big herd. He memorizes her unique striping pattern. Isn't it amazing what evolution can do? If you believe that, I've got a bridge to sell you. It's amazing what Jehovah has done. Or think about snowflakes for a moment. Out of the trillions of snowflakes that fall in one large snowstorm, no two alike.
Stephen Lett there, giving us his wisdom on biology and the natural world. So he's speaking here at the 2024 annual meeting. And just to give you some kind of context, he's dealing with potential arguments that Jehovah's Witnesses might make about the paradise, one of which could be, oh, well, it would get boring living for eternity. And so what he's saying here is it would be impossible to be bored in the paradise because there's always going to be something different. You know, even in the natural world, no two things are the same. Snowflakes aren't the same. Even zebras have, or zebras for you Americans, they have different patterns. And then he uses this particular point about zebras to take a swipe at evolution. It's just astonishing, isn't it? The ignorance on show here. He's literally described in his lead-up remarks why there is an evolutionary advantage to zebras having different patterns. It's so that their young can recognize them. This is what evolution by natural selection is all about. If there is a trait in an organism that makes it easier for that organism to live long enough to reproduce, then that trait will more than likely get passed on. That's how evolution works. So there's an evolutionary advantage to baby zebras being able to identify the patterns of stripes on their mothers, and to zebras not all having the same stripes. There is an evolutionary advantage to it. And yet Stephen Lett just decides to give us this astounding display of ignorance and claim that this is evidence of an intelligent designer.
Honestly, I thought that I got this. I didn't. I was at the airport, and the guy behind me, he's complaining about the heat in Florida, and that the only reason why he was there is because of a funeral. I stopped him, and I said, "Excuse me, I overheard you saying that you were here for a funeral. Who died?" And he said, "My mother-in-law." Then I remember I have a magazine about comfort for those who grieve. And then I pulled the magazine out, and the conversation was done. In my mind, I said, "Wah, wah." He ain't gonna talk no more. He didn't. I don't want to be that obstacle. Let me listen. Let me be patient. Let me be humble and wait to see at the right time. But my goal's still the same. We're going to talk about my God, Jehovah. It's just not so fast.
So this was another highlight for me from the 2024 annual meeting. Otherwise, I must say, a fairly dull affair. There really wasn't that much going on in this year's annual meeting that took my interest. So every time that there was something interesting going on, and in this case, someone being interviewed who just had a little bit of energy and authenticity to them, it just kind of piqued my interest. So we've just been hearing from Maria Dill, and this particular montage is focusing on the fact that Jehovah's Witnesses are moving away from scripted presentations, and they are being asked to have a more engaged approach with those they're trying to recruit into the organization, and to listen to them and try to use their teaching toolbox in, I guess, a more subtle and less scripted way. And Maria is here giving us an example of where the old approach of just immediately reaching for some literature didn't work for her. Well, I think the main problem was that she was trying to exploit someone's death as an opportunity to recruit into her religion. I think that's probably the main problem. It wasn't the way that she did it. It's the fact that she was trying to use that situation at all. And yet, as you'll see from this recent sushi thumbnail here, this is exactly the approach that Jehovah's Witnesses are supposed to take. They are supposed to prey on emotionally vulnerable people including those who are going through bereavement, and they are supposed to exploit these tragedies as opportunities to recruit into the organization.
So this lady, I was about to pay, and she had these
very colorful
long,
nails.
colorful, decorated nails, and it's like she wanted me to say something about her nails.
Yeah, she definitely wanted to make a statement with them.
So I said, "Girl, your nails look good." And she was like, "Oh, well, my nails have a meaning." And I'm like, "They do?" And she's like, "Yeah, I want to support
domestic violence abuse
awareness month." And I'm like, whoa, you really care about people. Yeah, we went to the website.
Yeah, we showed the website.
And the featured article for that month was literally about domestic abuse. And she got to see some Bible principles, and she took that with her, and we had a good conversation.
I felt so sorry for the woman here, because very rarely do women get to speak. Let's just be honest about this. In the Jehovah's Witness religion, your opportunities to share your opinion and speak are limited compared to men. Men get to give talks. Men get to stand on the platform and mouth off about their opinions. Whereas women, the only way they're getting on the platform, as I've said before, is if they're cleaning the damn thing, or if they're being directed to give a presentation or an experience by a man. And finally, this poor woman gets to relate her experience on camera, and her husband is just cutting in all the time. So that was, for me, a bit distracting and awkward to watch. But I also just couldn't help but note the hypocrisy of them bringing up domestic violence. So they are talking again about this new approach that Jehovah's Witnesses are supposed to take of relying less on scripted presentations and just basically seeing where the conversation goes. And in this case, the woman notices this thing with the nails and that it's tied to awareness of domestic violence, and points to something on the jw.org website about domestic violence. And of course, what's being completely overlooked here is that Jehovah's Witnesses foster a policy whereby women are, and men, are more likely to be victims of domestic violence. Because in the Jehovah's Witness religion, the only way you can get a divorce is if there is some form of adultery. Even physical violence is not a sufficient reason for divorce, which leads to many abused men and women staying in violent relationships for years, and their only way out, their only way to basically not be physically assaulted, is to get a separation, which means that they're not actually allowed to remarry and move on with their lives. And yet here in the annual meeting, they have the gall to insinuate that Jehovah's Witnesses are ahead of the game when it comes to domestic violence. Anyway, those were my thoughts on the 2024 annual meeting of the Watchtower Bible and Tract Society of Pennsylvania. I hope you found my thoughts helpful or interesting in some way. Please let me know what you think in the comments below. I'd be intrigued to hear what your thoughts are as to what we've just been watching and some of the talks and new announcements that were unveiled to Jehovah's Witnesses. But that's all I have time for. Don't forget to subscribe to the Lloyd Evans channel for more such videos. And as always, thank you for watching.